Good morning. My name is Gabriela Barrios Longoria, and I'm a livability planner at the Department of Transportation and Mobility. Thank you all for joining us today for the second annual Moving Tucson Summit. Moving Tucson is the place where we all connect as a community. Our goals for the summit are to educate and inform, inspire by showing what is possible, and to get the community excited about the work we are doing in moving people. Together, we can improve safety and mobility. We have organized this summit to create a space for the community to come together to discuss transportation services, safety improvements, urban planning, public space, and transit. We brought together industry experts from around the country, public officials, technical staff, and community-based organizations to elevate our efforts on what it takes to build a community that allows everyone to thrive, regardless of your zip code. We will highlight local community-based organizations like Fuga and Avenidas Inc., who are doing work around transportation and mobility, as well as get the community inspired what other communities are doing. Panel discussions will introduce new perspectives, lessons learned, and tangible actions that we can take to address the issues that matter most to the community at this moment. At Moving Tucson, we're committed to centering conversations around equity, and that means moving everyone regardless of backgrounds and means of transportation. I would like to start today by acknowledging the work that we work on the unceded traditional land of the homelands of the Tohono O'odham Nation and the multi-millennial presence of the Pasquayaqui people, the stewards of the land past and present. This acknowledgement only becomes meaningful when combined with accountable relationships and informed actions, and is a first step in honoring the land we are on and their people. I would like to introduce our City of Tucson Mayor Rahina Romero, who will be giving opening remarks, followed by a discussion with our keynote speaker, moderated by Manisha Butra, the Mayor's Planning, Mobility, and Development Advisor. Mayor Rahina Romero was elected in November of 2019, becoming the first woman and first Latina mayor of Tucson. She was raised by immigrant farm workers in Somerton, Arizona. Rahina broke barriers early on as the first member of her family to vote and first to graduate from college. Mayor Romero's policy priorities include community safety, health and wellness, housing affordability, transportation and mobility, of course, climate action, and economic development, among others. Mayor Romero is the co-chair of Mayors Against Illegal Guns and an inaugural member of the Mayors Alliance to End Hunger. She is also a member of the Climate Mayors Network, and the Climate Mayors Network. Rahina Romero holds a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Arizona and a postgraduate certificate from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. Rahina is the proud mother of two bilingual, bicultural, and bi-adorable children, Emiliano and Luciana, and has been married to Ruben Reyes for 18 years. Mayor Romero.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. I really appreciate your innovative work that you do along with your colleagues on the Department of Transportation and Mobility, who are doing incredible things to move Tucson forward and move these policy issues that Mayor and Council have voted on. You are the workers. You are the front line. You are the ones that make things happen. So muchísimas gracias to you, Gabriela, and to all of your colleagues, both in the Department of Transportation and Mobility, and of course, the community that makes it all happen. Muy buenos días a todos. As practitioners and advocates and policymakers for mobility, safe streets for all, thriving corridors and neighborhoods, climate justice and equity, I'm excited to share this space with you all this morning. So for me, the question is, what does a healthy 21st century transportation system look like? For this, we must look at our past, our present, and our future. Over the past century, our communities have expanded and have been shaped around access to personal automobiles. Our oldest neighborhoods and districts are often more walkable and are near transit, for example, here in Tucson, El Presidio neighborhood, Menlo Park neighborhood, and Barrio Viejo are all around downtown, and you can walk them. You can live, work, and have fun around your neighborhood. We also have a legacy of interstate highway construction throughout this country, and the demolition of once walkable, vibrant neighborhoods. Here in Tucson, the development of I-10 and the destruction of Barrio Viejo, also next to downtown, as examples. More recently, we have worked to create better mobility options for all. We built the streetcar, brought to-go, bike share, and e-scooter services to Tucson, and invested in our bike boulevards and many other crosstown arterials. Our mobility needs during the pandemic caused us to rethink how we use our curb space, sidewalks, and parking lots. We changed our policies to allow streeteries and reduce parking requirements to allow outdoor patio seating at our local restaurants. We kept our buses, a streetcar, and paratransit services running, and SunTran was among 7% of transit systems that maintained service throughout the pandemic. And we made transit fare free, putting equity and access at the center of our decision making. As a city, we are looking at persistent systemic challenges and creating programs that will lead to long-lasting change. We are making impactful, layered investments to meet our housing needs, make getting around our city and the region safer and more convenient for all transportation modes, support economic development, address the climate crisis, and improve the quality of life for all Tucsonans. Tucson is preparing our future in a rapidly changing world. We are committed to building a Tucson that is prosperous and sustainable. In the last 2 years alone, we have made numerous investments. We have created new programs and city offices, including launching a community safety, health, and wellness program, an Office of Equity, a Housing First program, and the Tucson Million Trees Initiative and Storm to Shade programs that will reduce urban heat island effect while beautifying our neighborhoods. We are encouraging infill development in our central business district, along the Sunshine Mile corridor on Broadway, and within our neighborhoods with accessory dwelling units. We are about to adopt a comprehensive economic development strategy as well. At Tuesday's Mayor and Council meeting, we identified next steps for becoming part of the nationwide Vision Zero network, demonstrating our commitment to eliminating traffic fatalities and severe injuries on our roadways. We are also going to deliver a climate action plan by the end of this year. Currently, we are planning a 15-mile high-capacity north-south transit route. With Tucson International Airport at its southern terminus, traveling through the city of South Tucson, north through downtown Tucson, all the way to the Tohono Tadai Transit Center and Tucson Mall. We are laying the groundwork for bus rapid transit, but we also want to plan where we could eventually support a streetcar route to replace some or all of the BRT route. Last year, thousands of Tucsonans helped create Move Tucson, our citywide mobility master plan. They voiced their support for increasing transportation choices, reducing mobility barriers, improving safety, fixing our roads, and centering equity and climate resilience. One of the most important investments governments can make is in public infrastructure. Our streetcar, built less than a decade ago, has brought billions in private investment, new housing, businesses, and jobs to Tucson. It is proof that public infrastructure and transit investment leverages private investment. We are positioning ourselves to receive federal funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law. We are finding opportunities to collaborate with our partners in the region and across the state. We are advocating at the state legislature and with the governor's office, and we are preparing for our sales tax initiatives that will help create sustainable funding to fix our local residential roads and in the near future, our regional infrastructure. Now, through May 17th, City of Tucson voters will have a chance to vote on Proposition 411 to approve the extension of a half-cent sales tax to repair every neighborhood street in the city over the coming decade. Proposition 411 also includes funding to improve road safety and efficiency by investing in bike lanes, sidewalks, street lighting, and traffic signal upgrades to move across town quicker. In Tucson, we are finding ways to invest in mobility for all, creating bike boulevards and shared use walking paths, developing higher speed bus corridors, and pursuing opportunities to expand our streetcar network, as well as reinstate Amtrak passenger rail service to Phoenix. Each of these can help us reduce our reliance on car travel. Cars will continue to be a prevalent mode of transportation. We are working on code amendments that will expand our electric vehicle infrastructure to reduce the carbon impact of automobiles in our community. We are creating the building blocks for an economically vibrant, sustainable desert city for all. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to hear from Dr. Garcia and look forward to a conversation with her and all of you following her keynote remarks. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Mayor, for sharing your vision for the future of mobility in our city and for always being a champion for transportation mobility, not only on a local level, but state and national level. So we are so lucky to have you here today and as our mayor. So thank you. And I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker who will share her vision, which goes far beyond transportation and mobility. Dr. Evie Garcia Sombrana is an assistant professor in city and metropolitan planning at the University of Utah. Her philosophy, methodology, and ethos revolves around conducting research and plans in partnership with stakeholders, being from the grassroots or from institutionalized forms of government. She has spent time as a professional planner in Albuquerque, New Mexico, San Francisco, California, Springfield, Missouri, Washington, D.C., and Chicago, Illinois. Her most recent community engagement research have sought to elucidate currently existing as well as historical relationships between market typologies, the structured dynamics of housing stratification and distribution, advocacy and community organizing strategies in diverse, primarily Latino communities. And her work also has implications pertaining to inequality in transportation, recovery from disasters, and the role of the state in housing policy more generally. Evie's earned her PhD in urban planning and policy from the University of Illinois at Chicago. She holds dual master's degrees from the University of New Mexico in community and regional planning and Latin American studies, and a bachelor's in environmental sciences from Inter-American University in Puerto Rico. Now you will hear from Dr. Evie Garcia Sombrana. Thank you, Evie.
I have to unmute myself. Seems like I'm sharing, but it's not like full screen mode. Let's see if this works. All right. Well, thank you, Gabriela, for such a kind introduction. I really enjoy listening to Mayor Romero's remarks of all the projects that are happening in the city and will happen in the future to create more equity in so many aspects, like from housing to transportation, and definitely there's a connection between the two. So today I will be talking about community development and transportation, both from the perspective of older adults, people of color, and people experiencing homelessness. So I first wanted to introduce you to my framework that I use when I go to the community, and it's asset-based community development. So asset mapping is probably something that you have heard before. So it's the idea that we go to the community, and many times we are part of the community as well, and we like draw in a map what are the assets, what are the things that make this community great. You can also do it with objects. I do a lot of this methodology that is like by James Rojas, who is a planner in Los Angeles, in where he uses also objects that are in the everyday life. It could be like the rollers for your hair and flowers, to envision what a great community will look like. And usually like planners and engineers, we think about it mostly from the physical perspective, and sometimes we forget that there's like other assets in our community, like individuals, and we have like associations, which is like different individuals getting together based on their interest and based on their passions. We also have institutions that it could be the university or also like governments that also contribute a lot to our communities. And of course, we already mentioned physical assets. The local economy is absolutely key. And today I will tell you a lot of stories that highlight history and culture in our community, and I will tell them through like pictures. So I use a lot of like community-based research, and also a lot of like photo voice. So first I will introduce you to this concept of asset-based community development through a series of stories, and then I will highlight my newest project. So this is like actually an article that I wrote a couple weeks ago. So it's like pretty hot of the press. So first, this is one of the assets that I would like to highlight: individuals. Gabriela was talking about how I also do a lot of work in housing. I'm part of a board of an organization called Assist Incorporated. And what they do is like help people who are low income, and many of them are older adults and people with disabilities, to be able to do home modifications so they can have better homes, of course, like more quality homes, but also increase their mobility. So they add ramps, or they had like rails where you have the steps and things like that. So I was doing this project in where I got to talk to a lot of older adults about how that change in their home was absolutely key to be able to gain mobility in their neighborhood. And people talked about, again, like how adding even steps and a rail in front of their home was key to welcome other older adults that were in the neighborhood and they wanted to meet in the balcony. And again, without having the rail, they will not be able to do so. Also, like rails were added on the side of the home so people can access their garage, because for a lot of older adults, that is very challenging. But a lot of people were taking transportation. And one of those individuals was like Meredith, who is in this image. So again, she's a low-income individual, and with assisted a lot of home modifications in her home, which increased her mobility. But she was telling me a story that it was like different than other people. And it really highlights the ideas that people have in the community and how they make their communities better. So she was saying how she didn't want to use a walker. and she actually was like completely opposed to it. But then she started to use a walker, and she actually found that it was very helpful, because when she could go to walks, she could sit. When she was waiting for the bus, she was like transit dependent, she could sit there as well. And she could carry the groceries in the bus. So it had all these like added benefits. And something that she did is that she went to the Deseret Industries, that is something similar to the Goodwill, and she bought for $5, for $10, this like walker to all her friends in this complex that she lived. It's like a mobile home park for older adults. And then she started to do like a walking group for her friends. So they live very close to the Jordan River Parkway Trail, which is like a beautiful place to relax. And she will walk there like 3 times a day. And then she made this group to invite her friends. So again, and that's an example of like how individuals in our community have these amazing gifts. Another gift, or another asset is associations. So this is a picture in my neighborhood in Rose Park. So something that we noticed is that there was a lot of speeding in the neighborhood, especially like closer to a place where there was a park and there was a school, and the neighborhood association wanted to do something about it. And so they started to say, well, you know, there's like other cities that are doing this idea of like paint a pavement, maybe that will help with the traffic speed. And me being a researcher, I was like, I'm not sure if that will actually have an effect, but we can do an experiment. We can actually like do it. And I will have like students at the university test if this like reduce the speeds. And then people in the community needed to also mobilize their own assets, because first of all, there was not an ordinance to be able to do this, but someone luckily was a transportation planner in our association. So they were able to draft an ordinance based on other cities. And then we found out that in our association, we have people that were artists, and people wanted to contribute in all kinds of ways. So we painted the first Paint a Pavement mural in Utah, and through the research that I did, I actually find out that this was reduced by 3 miles per hour. And then we started to do like more and more murals. So we have done several of these like paint pavements. So the other asset in the community besides associations, again, associations are you have a lot of individuals that get together to do something in their community. We have institutions, and in this you can think the government as an institution, or universities and as institutions. And this case study is actually from the Humboldt Park neighborhood in Chicago. I still do a lot of work with them. I'm Puerto Rican, and I was the co-chair of the Puerto Rican organization in Chicago. And something that they did a long time ago, so in 1993, was to create this like gateway in the form of Puerto Rican flags, because there was like massive gentrification, and there still is, but the gentrification really like slowed down with the creation of a space that was distinctively Puerto Rican. And the first thing that made that happen, it was the creation of these flags, and they were done actually by the Department of Transportation. So the community went to the Department of Transportation, and there was like these funds available to do like streetscape improvements, and they had this idea. So they were the facilitators. And again, governments, departments of transportation can actually facilitate the ideas that people have in their community, and that very much support their culture, and in this case, displacements. And by the way, these are the largest monumental flags in the whole world that are not made of cloth, and they have won many like building awards. So if you have the opportunity to go to Chicago, go and check them out. So the fourth asset is the physical space. And we talked about like how as planners or transportation engineers, or either as people that work in the city, many times we're thinking about the physical space as our, playground, as a space to do things better, of course. And something that I tend to do in my classes, so they have this class that is called the West Side Studio, is to not only do reports. So reports are very important, and with my students, we always create some analysis and some research and something that the community can use. But something that I have learned over time is that even if you have a little bit of funding, in my case, I apply for ACE funding, that is funding from the city, to do events and to do things in the community. For me, that's become very important because people can see that there's something related to this plan, that it is now present in physical space, because many times people have to wait a long time for planning, and why not do some things that maybe are smaller and incremental, but that it shows that you heard what the community said right away. So for example, I was working on a plan that it was about signage, and something that we did, it was like highlight what are the community assets, and we created this this sign right away. And we have done that in various projects. Obviously, having some pedestrian interest is very important and something that everybody talks about. So we have created lots of murals in the community in order to increase that. Another thing is like the marketing of a neighborhood. So thinking about the creation of place. So we have created a lot of them with like businesses, like the Note district. And earlier, the mayor was talking about urban heat islands and like planting trees with the community. That's something that we had done as well. So again, what are those things that you can do to show that you have listened to the community that are no so long-term, and something that the community can also be involved and be part of. So the next asset is the local economy and exchange. Many times this might actually not involve any money at all. So the next two case studies that I will present are of people experiencing homelessness here in Salt Lake City. And so there was this project that I worked on looking at what were the effects of decentralizing the main temporary shelter from like 1,500 beds to multiple shelters with less beds for different populations. You have like women with children and families, single men, single women, couples, and so on. And I wanted to see how that like changed the transportation patterns. And the idea was to have a space, a new shelter that it had all the services that people needed. So they have a medical there, and they have like the food there as opposed to go to a different place. They could stay there as opposed to go to the library. So it was more like centralized, which was a great thing. But many of these shelters ended up being far away, especially the men's shelter. There was a lot of like NIMBYism around that one in particular, and ended up being in a different city, not in Salt Lake City, where there's like better transportation system. And a lot of people talked about how to look for employment. They actually like needed to have like these passes, and the Utah Transportation Agency was providing these passes for free, but they had to actually travel to a place that it was like closer to the previous road home. So it was a little bit hard for people to be able to do that. However, there were other methods that were used, like giving like tokens to people. This will be less available for employment and more for like going to see a case manager or looking for housing and things like that. And there was like one individual that I talked to that he had a great idea, which was like, why not make a card that it says that we are staying in this shelter, because they already have a card that it looks at the very much like the university card, in where you have like your name and your photograph, and why not use this to be able to take transit, like it's a pass, like the students do it. So again, that was like a wonderful idea that this individual had. And then the other assets is like thinking about cultures and stories. And I have told you already many stories. So again, in storytelling, it's very important to highlight the assets in your community. But I have like this a story that is like also related to the decentralization of the shelter. And that shows how people are attached to their culture. So we have a group here from like farmers workers. They travel from place to place. And oftentimes they stay in the homeless shelter. So when they were close to the road home, they actually were close to a Catholic church that had like a Spanish speaking mass, and it also had like services for them. And there was like also all kinds of things that were Mexican in this neighborhood, from like supermarkets to other services. And now the men's shelter, it's 13 miles away from that place. So a lot of them, they decided to not go to this like homeless shelter, because I guess it was too far away. And if they did, when they did, because sometimes they wanted to stay there, they will walk together 13 miles to the homeless shelter, and then they will come back to look for work or to receive the services that were more culturally appropriate. So these are all the assets, and I want to summarize these ones again. So thinking about individuals, associations, institutions, physical assets, the local economy, or just exchange, barter, services, and also thinking about culture and stories. And the way that you can use this idea of asset-based community development is by looking at a story and see which assets are highlighted in that story. So again, the idea of the assets is that these are basically ingredients that are making your community great. And here's an image of a woman that is transit dependent, and she saw that one time when she got in the bus, there was all these like tokens everywhere, like in the seats, and obviously the driver had put them in there, and she highlighted that this was an African-American driver and a woman that she found very friendly. And she had done this like very nice thing, and she felt like she was like so appreciated by the transit system, as someone that again rode the bus out of the time. And then she felt welcome, and she said, you know, this really made the difference. This really made my day. So we have here, like again, in individuals that are making our community great. Those might be like bus drivers. We might have the institutions, which might be the transit agency that obviously made this possible. And in terms of like the local economy, we might think that having some ways of like exchange that might be different are also like important in our community. So I will now talk about this latest research that I did, and it's very much again around images, just documenting the experience of low-income women riding transit. And there were like 22 interviews, and they're also in Portland and in Salt Lake City. And something that they highlighted was safety. So how just thinking about like sidewalks and having complete sidewalks, or having places that were desolated, and how that made them feel uncomfortable on their journey to take transit. And of course, the idea that some spaces were less illuminated, in particular in some residential neighborhoods or in some industrial zones. Many of people of color tend to live in places that are maybe far away from the central city, which is like gentrifying. So this is kind of like a common experience for people that particularly have to work early. So this woman was talking about riding the bus before like 6 a.m. and how she felt uncomfortable doing that. Other things that people talk about is like the things that happen inside of like transit. So sometimes some other members of the community might be doing unwanted activities. Some people might talk about drugs or like vandalism, and how these women didn't feel safe. Some ways that they try to increase their safety, it was always by trying to go to bus stops that or just stations that had more lighting. The cameras in the train make them feel more comfortable. Also having security make them feel more comfortable. Something I wanted to say here is, again, these are like women of color. A majority of them were Latinas. I have other of my colleagues saying that, maybe the experiences of African Americans, especially African American males, might be very different than what I'm telling you right now about the police. But in terms of like my research, that's like what it showed, that people do feel safer. Ways that to increase the safety is just to having obviously more people, and women talked about this idea of how they will try to put their headphones, and we want to be left alone, because many of them, especially young women, were harassed by other riders, and that was seen to be like something that happened quite often. So just like being able to have other people make them feel more comfortable. And some strategies that they had, it was like sitting close to where the driver is, or sitting close to other riders that they saw as friendly. Many of them actually created community inside of the buses. Like there's some people that rode the bus at the same time because they ended their shifts at the same time. So they kind of like knew each other, and that made them feel better. Or going to the back of the bus so they could see that everything that was happening. They talked about increasing comfort or having places to sit. Something I found interesting, it was that some of them travel with their intergenerational households. So they talked about creating like larger seating, but they treasure actually like this time that they got to sit and they got to bond with their family members. Many of them talked about access, and this woman told me a story of like how she had to wait twice for a bus because one of the buses it didn't have a way for didn't have the ramp. So there was somebody that was waiting in a wheelchair and could not actually get into the bus, and neither she could get into the bus because she had her baby with her and the baby stroller. But other people talked about how in general having the space in front of the bus could also be good for people that are carrying things. And many of them talked about like the picture on the right is like a person experiencing homelessness, just carrying things in the bus. Other thing that made them feel that it was accessible, it was the fact that many women and people also outside of this research, people that experience homelessness might travel with their pets. So having their pets there was like important, being allowed to do that. And also having their bikes, a place for that. And many of them spoke like how their commutes, especially women, they felt like safer riding their bikes than walking if it was like a long distance. And that, again, that was like a strategy for them to avoid any potential sexual harassment that they might experience. And many of them, of course, being like low income women, they talked about the barriers that they have to be able to afford transit. And they knew, some of them like knew that there was help. Some of them had like some card that was like subsidized and found that very helpful. Other ones were students, and again, they found that extremely helpful. Other ones went unaware, like there was a youth that in particular, she said, you know, when I was in high school, I didn't even know that there was like a special rate for youth, and I was like paying as an adult all this time. So there's all kinds of, you know, communication issues. And in terms of the transfer, people actually talked a lot about that, like how sometimes they were asked for a transfer while they were in the bus already. And sometimes they felt that that has something to do with their ethnic identity. And some people also mentioned like how they were treated differently. For example, this woman was telling a story of like how she went with her kid that had soda in the bus, and she was told to throw away the soda. But there was another woman that came in, and she was white and she wasn't asked the same. So there was people have like all kinds of different stories of like how they might have been treated different based on their racial identity. And finally, I just wanted to talk about how make people feel welcome, because this was like a question that I asked, and a lot of them talked about, you know, just the bus driver being like friendly and just like saying hello, having things that are clean, and just having information or signage in their language, being either like outside of the bus, in advertisements, or even having again information about the bus, that it was like in Spanish. So the majority of the participants were Spanish speakers, but also other people that didn't speak Spanish. They talked about how in the apps you can have like different translations, and they really appreciated that. And several women mentioned that they felt represented when there were like other drivers and female of color driving the bus, or that they were again visible working in the transportation system, like this image of this Asian and young woman being working for the transportation system. And I already told you the story of tokens, but again, just like there was like many ways that people felt welcome. And with that, I'm going to just finish my talk, and I really look forward to more conversations with you, and also with Mayor Romero as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia. I'm Minta Butra again, everyone. I'm going to be moderating a little bit of a discussion between Dr. Garcia and Mayor Romero. I am the mayor's planning, mobility, and development advisor. So we're going to have a couple questions that I moderate, and then if we have time, hopefully some audience questions as well. Dr. Garcia, your presentation made me think a lot about the power of stories and how stories really generate other stories. I'm sure we were all like coming up with our own examples of our experiences, but also of being out in the community, whether you're talking with, you know, observing on your own or talking with friends and family about questions of safety, access, and what we can do using this asset-based community development approach to make our communities and our spaces more welcoming, create more belonging. So thank you so much for your amazing remarks. So the first question I'm going to turn over to the mayor. So communities of color across the US have been disproportionately impacted by past policies such as urban renewal and interstate highway construction, which resulted in demolishing and dividing once thriving neighborhoods and created a long legacy of disinvestment and disenfranchised by these communities from their local government. As we plan for our transportation future, what role does environmental justice as well as repairing harm play?
Oh my goodness, that is, my brain is going like crazy. It's like popcorn in there with thoughts because it's such a complex issue. Because of past redlining policies, communities of Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color were pushed towards edges or other areas, undesirable areas of cities throughout the country. And as a result, we are still feeling the effects of those redline policies, right? Because one, environmental issues in terms of zoning, communities of color, it was easier for policymakers to zone areas where these neighborhoods were, these neighborhoods of color. They were zoned industrial. There was a lot of environmental damages placed in these areas. And then, of course, many of these neighborhoods were separated in the 50s when the freeway system was built without really looking at the effects of that built environment and how it felt and what it did to these neighborhoods and communities of color. And also, of course, in the 60s, and Tucson you can see all of these policy effects in the city of Tucson. And so with the freeway and anywhere towards the south of the freeway or the west of the freeway, you see this huge, massive structure and the infrastructure in these areas where, by the way, Indigenous, Black, and other people of color were pushed because of redlining too. And then, of course, in the 60s, because of urban renewal, we saw Barrio Viejo here in Tucson, which was a predominantly Mexican-American neighborhood. Yaqui and Otam people lived there too. It was demolished in the name of progress and in the name of building fancy new convention centers and in a governmental center. But it really did away with many generational homes in our downtown. Many businesses that were Latino owned were demolished, including our historic cathedral. And so it affected our communities. It displaced many families and still is a very huge trauma here in Tucson. And so the policy making and the infrastructure and how that affects communities of color, generational wealth, and and being able to connect to each other and be able to use before, there's lots of neighborhoods here around downtown that you can live, work, and play in the same area, right? Because it's connected to transit. You don't have to own a vehicle. But the farther you get out from our transit lines, the harder it is to connect to each other. And so Tucson is a perfect example of all the work that we need to do. And I'll just mention a couple of things in terms of policy making. The Biden administration created this Justice 40 approach to investing in infrastructure and other programs created in his administration, which basically says 40% of funds must be used for environmental equity, for environmental justice, for infrastructure that connects these neighborhoods that were disconnected physically by creating freeways and making it more easy for these communities of color to connect back. So Justice 40 approach both in the bipartisan infrastructure bill and in other funding sources within the Biden administration, federally, it will help alleviate this. In the city of Tucson, in our case, in the city of Tucson, we have been very intentional as mayor and council. We created an equity office and an equity officer that will help us look at these, these inequities that have been happening for generations in terms of infrastructure investment in the city of Tucson. I don't know if that answered your question, but
I gave you a tough one, but I think just the acknowledging of our past trauma, but the fact that we now have this equity office and that we're putting those conversations front and center in our decision making is certainly a huge piece of it. So we often talk, I think, a lot about, it's easier to observe maybe what's not working. Dr. Garcia, I wanted to ask you also, what are some positive experiences? Are there positive experiences of mobility from your youth that now inform your vision for the future of transportation in our communities? And how can changes in our transportation system improve our experience and sense of community here in Tucson?
Well, thank you, Aisha, for such a great question, because it transported me mentally to San Germán, Puerto Rico. Just, being a young person. So something that I loved about my town, it was a small town. So about small in the context of Puerto Rico, it's like 30,000 people in that town. But there's only two things. It's either rural, when you have a farm, or you have the city center. And the city center, it's like very much developed with kind of like a Spanish settlements, in where you have everything there, like the church and the school and the government and your plaza. So everything is like centered around that city life. So I spend a lot of time walking, and something that I think we have to do better is how to have a youth walk more and be able to walk to school. And for that, we obviously have to create safety, right? So people feel comfortable going and walking to school. Unfortunately, in the United States, I was doing this national student study, and it shows that at least I was particularly looking at the Hispanic community and how they actually walked a lot in middle school. But then after high school, when they're allowed to have a car, not that having a car is bad, they stop walking. But they probably presumably are living in their same neighborhood. So it's how can we create more of a culture of walking and biking, and foster that more in youth. And I think that again we can do that a little bit better by talking about the public health benefits of doing such a thing, and just again fostering healthy habits among young people.
Great. Gabriela, do we have a couple questions from the audience?
None yet.
Okay, well, we have a plan for this. We have another question we've prepared. So one of the people I have found to be really inspiration is Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. And one of my favorite quotes from her is, "People closest to the pain should be closest to the power, driving and informing policymaking." As Latina women in leadership roles, you're both trailblazers. I've noticed that you both advocate for centering the voices of marginalized communities and individuals in your approach to your work, and you advocate for equitable representation in decision-making spaces. Do you have any tips or advice to share with folks about how to do this well?
Well, yeah, I can get started if that's. So I here in Salt Lake City, I teach a class that is called the Westside Leadership Institute, and it's in Spanish, and a lot of immigrants come and take this class, and they learn about how government works, right, and how to make their voices being heard in government, and like how planning commission works and how city council works, what is the role of the mayor, so all of those things, and again how they can make a difference in their community, and they can be involved. So I think that that's absolutely key. For people to have power, they have to learn like how our systems work in order to be able to change them. And I have found that obviously government is like very open. If not, they really want to, and they need the voices of people, right? So in a way, they're like begging for people to come and like speak up and come up with ideas. And that's what we need. We need, again, more like back and forward between people and government. Something that I have found in this Westside Leadership Institute is that after people being very involved in their communities at the local level, they might also come and be parts of boards and commissions, and they are parts of this creating change in incredible ways. So I think that that's a good way to get started. Just get started in your community and learn how you can make change, and then make change happen.
I love that, Dr. Garcia, that you teach a class on how to be involved in your community and how you make your voice heard. For me, my personal experience was that what really woke me up, and of course I come from a family that my dad was, even though he went to 6th grade, he read the papers and kept himself informed in terms of politics. And so we heard that. I grew up hearing my mom and dad talking about politics and how policies affect families and workers. And so it was just like stuck in my mind. But I never really thought I would be interested in any days. So when I came to Tucson at 17, graduated from high school in Yuma, came to Tucson, and it took some time for me to take a class. It was, and maybe it's the same type of class that you teach, Dr. Garcia. It was a history of Mexican Americans and Chicanos here in the United States. And the teacher talked about, the history and being connected to this land and this country, where we had always been, we had always felt as though we really didn't belong. And in reality, and the facts are that we belong here. We have been here for many generations. And so it kind of woke up my interest in, and the teacher also talked about policy and how to be involved and why it's important to pay attention to the policies that are being made by every level of government. And she talked about getting involved and making your voice heard and voting. And so it woke up this intention in me that really made me feel as though, okay, I've got to do something. I have it in my hands to do something. So I really usually encourage people to get themselves involved in volunteering, either in boards, committees, and commissions, in campaigns for a candidate that they really believe in and identify with, or with an issue, an initiative with an issue that they really care about. That there are opportunities, like Dr. Garcia said, to speak to your elected officials. On my end, and I do see this on behalf of my council colleagues as well, that we want to hear from you. We really do. And I have made it very intentional to have community engagement opportunities with surveys, online surveys, and virtual meetings and town halls. And, Move Tucson was something that I highly pushed to have very thorough community engagement, and then push some more on the community engagement to make sure that we were hearing the hard to find voices, right? The workers, the communities of color that don't have access and don't have time to come to City Hall, or go to a meeting in person. So we have to find them. And so that's what I would suggest. I love the idea of this class. I did the class too, but there are nonprofit organizations like Lucha and Chispa and other nonprofit groups that are working. Activate 48 is a new group that is wanting volunteers and are putting policy positions and policy papers forward for elected officials like me to pay attention. So there's so many different ways, but I would say the first step you have to take is find that volunteer opportunity that really wakens up your passion and get in there. Sometimes you shouldn't. I would say all the times you shouldn't wait for people to invite you to the table, to the decision table, making table. I made my own way and elbowed my own way into the decision making table many, many, many years ago. And that's how your voices are heard.
Thank you. So last question, and I think maybe 30 seconds each. Starting with Dr. Garcia, we're facing so many urgent issues: climate crisis, income inequality, lack of affordable housing, erosion of democracy, and they're all systemic. They require a variety of policy actions. Any advice for us on how you break down these really big challenges into doable actions while also managing political realities? How do you build the political will? Dr. Garcia, please.
So I'm going to tackle the first part and we'll leave to Mayor Romero the political will. But something that I teach to my students in this class is that it's important to have a dream. So what is your dream? And the dream is when we do visioning planning, right? It's just having everything that you want in this kind of perfect world in a way. So have a dream and fight for that dream. But it's important that you ask also, what are you going to do Monday morning, right? So it's something you have to do just when you wake up tomorrow and start your weekday. So you have to do that. Always think about your vision and your dream, but work every day towards that goal through your actions and everything that you do really.
And I would say, in terms of policy and electing people that are passing policy that you believe in and that you do the legwork to help the policymakers that are going to push the policies that you believe in that affect you day to day and affect your communities is very important. So elections have consequences. For me, as a person that has been politically awake for many, many years, elections have consequences. And so the lack of participation in elections, in many communities of color, young people, that really is affecting our future. And so I think as a political being that I am, every policy and every side of your life, whether it's education or healthcare or transit or you name it, is policy that is decided by someone. So I would say participate. It's in your hands, and elections have consequences.
Thank you so much, Mayor and Dr. Garcia, for joining us this morning. I think you're welcome to log off now if you'd like. I know our next thing is a really amazing video. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your gathering.
So next up, we have a video from Smart Growth America. The folks from the Smart Growth America team came to Tucson to talk with folks in the community about complete and safe streets for all. The video is about 7 minutes long, and it really shows what's possible and what we're already doing here in the community. So cue up the video. Thanks, y'all.
started.
Hey, Manisha, I'm not sure if we're supposed to be seeing a video, but we're not seeing anything at this point.
You know what? It looks like the video, we're having some technical difficulties. So maybe we can do a little switcheroo if you're ready. City Manager Michael Ortega is on the line with us.
Thank you, Manisha. Yes,
Yeah.
Mr. Ortega, if you'd like to give your remarks, that would be great. We're running a little overtime, so we'd rather have your remarks and show the video to participants after the fact.
That sounds great. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm sorry to barge in there to tell you the video wasn't showing or wasn't planned, but I figured somebody ought to maybe tell you that. So first of all, thank you for having me. Second, I was able to catch some of the mayor's comments there towards the end. And as you can see from her commentary, really a great leader and someone who's setting the stage, not only for Tucson, but also for the region and obviously the entirety of the nation on a variety of different fronts. So pretty excited to be a part of the mayor's team on that. And I think as we think about coming out of the pandemic, you know, whenever that happens, the bottom line is, what did we learn from it? You know, how do we as participants in this world learn from all the challenges that came out of the pandemic, but also all of the opportunities? And thinking of transportation and all of the related components of that is extremely important for us. And quite frankly, the bottom line opportunity. And it's really up to us, as the mayor suggested towards the end there, it's engagement. And it's that engagement to make our world a better place, and whatever that looks like. And it's going to take different forms. I would encourage you to think about and look at how the entirety of the world benefits from, you know, actions of you know, just maybe a small number of folks, right? But it's truly important to recognize that role as the opportunity. So with that, I'll introduce Sam Credio, our new, I guess eventually I'll probably start calling him new, but Sam Credio, our transportation, it's a director of transportation and mobility department. Just a little bit about Sam. Sam actually worked in my office for about a year, a little better than a year. So he was the deputy director over at DTM, and I brought him over to my office and did some great things, totally unrelated to transportation, at least he thought, but little by little he realized how the big picture is to recognize, you know, how it all goes together. And some of the projects, you know, probably weren't necessarily fun, but definitely had an opportunity for him to see how it all goes together. And so really looking forward to some great things in his new role. So congratulations to Sam. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Sam. Take care. Have a good one.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the chance just to chat with you all real briefly. You know, I'm on my third week on the job, although I'm not new to transportation or to the city of Tucson. I grew up here in Tucson, and I've really been part of the transportation community for a long time now. And it's really been exciting to see the evolution of transportation and mobility over the years. And I'm excited to be in this role and serve the community in this capacity, because we are doing a lot of great things, some of which you'll hear about today. So thank you so much for joining us. We've got some great talks ahead of us. I do want to take a moment and just thank some of our sponsors for this event: the American Council of Engineering Companies of Arizona, ACEC, as well as the National Institute for Transportation and Community. So thank you so much for that. And really thank you to our mayor for her opening remarks. You know, I really appreciate the mayor's leadership through the pandemic, and also as we start rethinking about how we're going to shape our community relative to transportation and the impact that has on everyone's lives. And what you're going to see today is that transportation really is only a small piece of the puzzle. And there's really, there's other aspects that go along with that. And so, you know, I encourage you to stick around today and listen to some of the talks. And then also I want to thank our keynote speaker, Dr. Garcia. Dr. Garcia and I have a small connection in that we are both Puerto Rican. Yo soy Boricua. And so that was fun to hear her talk a little bit about the Puerto Rican flags at Humboldt Park. My mom's family is from Chicago, or lives in Chicago, and I've actually been to Humboldt Park, and it's really a fun thing to do is go stand under those flags and really honor my family's heritage. And then I believe we touched just briefly on Vision Zero and what that means for the community. And we're starting down this path to identify what does it look like to become a Vision Zero community. And what that means is a city taking a firm stance on eliminating all traffic-related fatalities and serious injuries. And that's something that we take very seriously. And I'm excited to work with our team on shaping what that's going to look like for our community. So just thinking ahead at the conference, there's some highlights I want to give you on what you can expect today. So one of our first sessions is going to be at the intersection of safety and mobility, adaptations for great places and street. Then we're going to take a little cafecito break. I've got my coffee already, but that'll give you a chance to grab some coffee and then hear a little bit more about the Tucson Norte Sur community ambassadors to talk a little bit about our equitable transit-oriented development project. And I encourage you to stick around for that. And then rounding out the day, we have 2 more sessions, more than just 2 wheels, how coalition building and e-bike policies are changing cycling spaces. And then finally, defining equity from the ground up, community-led decisions on transit, housing, and development. However, just like Apple says, we have one more thing. I encourage you to hang around for the last Q&A. We'll be having one of our former assistant city managers and a good friend of mine, Albert Elias, joining us for some Q&A and then some takeaways from the day. So I really hope that you enjoy our time together, and please stick around. And again, thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to Gabriella and again our sponsors for today's event. I appreciate you giving me a few chance to speak, and enjoy the day. Thanks, Gabriella.
Thanks, Mr. Credio, and thank you to Mr. Ortega for joining us today. It means a lot as a city staff to have our leadership here really representing and showing support that these events matter. So I thank you all, and thank you to our sponsors and ACC Arizona and NITSE here at the University of Arizona. This wouldn't have been possible without you, and lastly, my team. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.